This might be the shortest review of all time. What is the name of the game? Mechs vs Kaijus. What's the gameplay? Mechs vs Kaijus. So in case you never watched Pacific Rim or something like that, these stories are always the same. City is being attacked by giant monsters, giant mechs that fight the giant monsters are mankind's last hope. Who will win? So yeah, it's not complicated, but not everything has to be. So what kind of game is Mechs vs Kaijus? Well, it's a tower defense game where you control Odin, a powerful mech that leads the charge against the Kaijus. You are not alone though, you will have two other mechs either side of you of your choice, and then a selection of shield walls, Tesla coils, grinders, flamethrowers, artillery, etc, in the form of towers which cost money that you earn from killing kaiju. Very simple. Kaiju come for you in waves and you have to defend the wall that you stand on from being breached. After completing a scenario, you then earn gold and research which can be spent on upgrading your towers, unlocking new mech companions, repairing and upgrading your mechs, and purchasing additional military aid. Now, after the success of Armored Core 6, I feel like Ling from Kung Pao saying, "You should be able to enjoy this now!" Mech games always have this initial barrier to entry where many gamers simply cannot jive with the idea of not playing as a person that is visible in front of them. Now, if you are a mech fan, then this is somewhat good, though I have to admit that it's not like you have a world of freedom here. First and foremost, you only have access to one mech, and then upgrades are things like more damage, more ammo types, bigger magazine. What I'm trying to get at here is that there is no mech building in this game, it's mostly stats. Mech companions usually specialize in something. For example, Aegis specializes in damaging elites, and mechs like Abraxas are good at AoE damage. You can upgrade your companion stats, but you aren't fiddling with their ammo types or anything like that. Once in game, you are by every sense of the definition a turret. But as you play later levels will allow your mechs to jump jet to predetermined spots on the map, so you're not entirely static. All this to say that I don't think that you're going to get your kicks from the mech customization. Killing kaijus and managing hordes of horrible Pokemon are going to be where you get your fix. Now, up front, the first few missions are a cakewalk, pretty much just Weedles and Caterpies, but when you see the Caterpies that drank red cordial, you're going to want to reassess your situation. The staple tower that you'll be using from start to finish are shield walls. They're cheap and they stop everything on the ground. Couple that with the grinder in front and your bug problem won't last very long. It's probably worth noting that kaiju will not attack Tesla coils, anti-air turrets, or grinders, so just about everything else needs to be behind a shield wall, otherwise the Caterpies will eat it. Having a plan is all well and good, but every mission or scenario limits where you can place towers or mechs, and sometimes limits the tower types available, forcing you to come up with different solutions. You know that grinder wall combo? Well, too bad, because there isn't a spot in front of the shield. Perhaps placing artillery further back might cover that area, for example. On top of having mechs and towers, you do have abilities on cooldown. Some of them you need to research to get access, and they often require additional research for them to become viable. For example, calling ground forces is like throwing a paper airplane in the rain. But once you upgrade the ability to drop 4 little mechs instead of 1, they actually start doing something, so long as you don't drop them in the front lines. Let's talk quickly about how this game looks. Mechs vs Kaijus is made in Unity and is showcasing that you really can make games on that engine, as long as they look like they run on Sega Mega Drive. All this to say that Mechs vs Kaijus sports competent 16-bit graphics that give you the feeling that you're playing an old beloved game. Though the visuals don't particularly jump out at me as beautiful per se, I'd say they do nothing to offend the immersion. And there's a lot of blood, which is great. I will say that the game hits its stride more so in the last level of Chapter 1, where there are a lot of glow light sources that improve the visuals or at least give it some sort of identity. The mechs look cool, and I like the designs, but I wish that they at least twisted at the torso when firing rather than bending bullets like Morgan Freeman in Wanted. Kaiju are varied in design and kind of the star of the show, really. I mean, I know a bunch of them look like caterpies and radioactive spinnerack, but there's so many different types that function in different ways that it's hard not to be impressed seeing all of them stampeding across your lines. These feed me Seymour assholes are particularly annoying. They will surface in front of whatever tower is in front of them and look at it like a 2-year-old looks at your anime figurines on a coffee table before smashing the structure to smithereens. So let's take care of them quickly. Or how about these glow bugs that happily suicide into your shield walls and blow up? And let's not forget these ugly Lapras camels that fire out a beam that damages everything in front of them and it can't be blocked. So yeah, the Kaijus definitely have ways of ruining your day if you aren't constantly adapting, and they look good while doing it. Sound-wise, we kind of see the same thing. The music is catchy 16-bit game music loops that sort of drive you through the tower defense zen. Then chapter 2 hits and suddenly you are treated to tracks like Launch Sequence and Defcon 2, which absolutely bump you more into the feeling that you are in fact fighting hordes of monstrosities with giant mechs, to the sound of 16-bit mechanical gears grinding to the timing of 4/4. Gun sounds are okay. Odin's gun sounds a little weak at times. I wonder if this was a conscious decision not to make it annoying since you spend most of the game listening to it, but on the other hand, there's everything else firing off as well, and they aren't toned down. One of my favorite sounds is your mech saying reloading while reloading. The voice is way too cool, it's way too low, and has no added value other than it's there, and I'm here for it. So yeah, taken all together, you can see that there are improvements from chapter 1 to chapter 2 in both visuals and the soundtrack. I'd also say that the variety in mission design is also stepped up considerably as well in adding to the theme. One of my favorites is when you went too deep in the kaiju lair and you have to make a tactical retreat by leapfrogging your mechs away from the horde as they advance towards you. It's so badass. That's not to say that chapter 1's missions are bad. They are also good. I just prefer the second chapter, and I think most people will if they get there. Now, I did say that the first few missions are a cakewalk, but later you get optional missions that make me eat my words. Missions get harder with scaling complexity and added kaijus in just sheer numbers. So, oh yeah, and there's this bridge level where the game removes building spots with every single wave that passes, so it gets harder is what I mean. Quick shout out to the obvious homage to Westwood Studios, and by that I mean the entire optional level called Enter Westwood, the mission briefing stating that you enter the Anton Slavik neighborhood, who is a nod commander from Tiberian Sun. Also, the presence of the Apocalypse tank, Tesla coils, and Prism towers. Also, the achievement for finishing the mission Hell on Earth is called I Miss You, Old Westwood. I do too, buddy. I do too. Anyways, I don't think that there's a way to finish the first episode without grinding some levels for resources so that you have enough options to deal with what's thrown at you towards the end of the game. I'm a little torn on how I feel about this. On one hand, I hate having to go back and replay levels, and it makes me want to close the game rather than keep going. On the other hand, each level has 3 modes to complete, so it's not exactly like grinding the same level over and over. On one hand, this is a lazy way to reuse old content. On the other hand, this is probably a very small dev team. You see where I'm going with this? This is going to depend on what kind of gamer you are. I personally am not a fan of having to grind levels to progress through a story, and I don't think I would have seen it through if it wasn't a review. But I know there's also a lot of people that like completing games in every way possible, and this might not be a problem for you if this is your approach. While I'm talking about gripes, let's talk about another one. So kaiju can't be pathed, or rather you can't use towers to manipulate their pathing. They just run straight towards you, and you can stop them with shield walls, or you can kill them, and that's about it. I have nothing against this in premise, but you know how I was saying before that the missions limit where you can build things? Well, kaiju aren't limited in moving horizontally, or up and down the screen, and there is no way that you can influence them. This doesn't seem like a big problem, but consider the flying potato with eyes all over it. It sits back and it will pummel your wall from a distance. Because they fly, they can drift naturally up and down the screen. This means that there are scenarios where 1. They can shoot your wall and you cannot shield it. 2. They can be out of range of your mechs and your mechs can't shoot them because they can only shoot the closest thing. 3. You can only place Tesla coils or anti-air, maybe, but you cannot choose what they shoot at, so you have to hope that they will target that specific kaiju. Sometimes I felt like this was something that was outside of my control and not really fun to deal with. As I mentioned earlier, you can get upgrades from research, and there is an upgrade that will allow you to create a mech landing point, but I think it would be better if it just never happened. Another annoying thing I found was that you can have 2 walls built close together and it will catch 8 out of 10 projectiles, and 2 kaiju happen to be perfectly placed so that they shoot the gap. I don't know, I just find this frustrating. The kaiju have so much flexibility in comparison to my ability to build. Now I know that I can solve this, maybe, if you have a spot further back in between that lets you place a shield wall, but let's be real, no one wants to build that shield. They want to build artillery and tank factories, or something cool. Last but not least, Mechs vs Kaijus expects you to sell and replace shield walls like you're sprinting over hot coals. And yeah, the game slows down to a crawl when you open your build menu, but clicking on menu items doesn't always work the first time. And that can mean the difference between winning or losing the mission in some scenarios. Now, that sounds like a lot of bad things, but trust me, in the grand scheme, they are all really minor issues. I found myself losing track of all time while playing this game. It's a very addictive and Moorish gameplay loop that begs you to go another round and chase the next upgrade or the next mech companion. There's also a ladder displayed in the front menu of the game, so if you really want to test yourself, you can. There's also wave survival mode for those that want to dip their toes in that. So yeah, for 18.50 Australian dollars, this game absolutely goes on sale throughout the year, by the way. You can really not go wrong with Mechs vs Kaijus. While the presentation and sound design start off humble, they really come into their own as you progress through the campaign. There's a lot done within the game to keep the formula fresh, whether that be through the level design or the enemies that you encounter. And for those that want to chase those high scores, there's that aspect too. While there are mechs, I think that the customization is a bit wanting, and I think that having to replay missions to progress through the story might deter some people. But other than that, Mechs vs Kaijus is a fun little game that sits comfortably in that spot where you can just kill an hour or so, no strings attached. Gun to my head, and it's a Tesla coil, I give Mechs vs Kaijus a 6.5 out of 10.